In 40 years of practice, I have seen every kind of liar walk through my door. Nervous liars, sloppy liars, liars who confess within 10 minutes because the guilt is eating them alive. But I have only met one person in my entire career who lied with the patience of a saint for over a decade, and she was not the one having the affair. She was the one waiting. Her name, for our purposes, was Dorothy. His name was Gary. They came to see me in 2003, referred by their family physician, who told me on the phone that Gary was having trouble sleeping and Dorothy was concerned about the state of their marriage. Standard referral, nothing unusual. I scheduled them for a Thursday afternoon. When they walked in, I saw what I almost always see with long-married couples. Two people who had learned to navigate the same house without truly occupying the same room. Gary was 51, tall, thinning hair, the kind of man who wore khaki pants and a golf shirt to every occasion, including his own therapy. Dorothy was 48, shorter, heavier, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and a handbag she clutched on her lap like a shield. They had been married 23 years. 2 grown children, one still in college, a house in the suburbs they had bought in 1986 with a 30-year mortgage. Gary spoke first, which told me something. In my experience, the spouse who speaks first in the initial session is usually the one with something to manage. He said they had been drifting apart. He said the kids leaving home had made them realize they did not have much in common anymore. He said he loved Dorothy, but felt like they were roommates. I've heard that word, roommates, more times than I can count. It is almost always a preamble to something else. Dorothy nodded along. She agreed with everything. Yes, they had drifted. Yes, the empty nest had been hard. Yes, she wanted to reconnect. She was calm, measured. She looked at Gary when he spoke with an expression I could not quite read. It was not hostility, it was not sadness. It was something closer to observation, like she was watching a performance and evaluating it. I asked them each to describe a recent moment where they felt disconnected from the other. Gary talked about a dinner where they sat in silence for 20 minutes. Dorothy talked about a weekend trip where Gary spent most of it on his phone. I asked who he was texting. He said work. Dorothy said nothing, but she adjusted her glasses and looked at me for just a moment longer than necessary. That look. I did not understand it then. It would take me almost a year to understand what Dorothy was doing in my office. We met weekly for 4 months. The sessions were polite, productive on the surface. Gary was engaged, articulate, willing to do the homework I assigned. He wrote Dorothy a letter of appreciation. He planned a date night. He suggested they take a cooking class together. Dorothy participated in all of it. She smiled at the right moments. She thanked Gary for his efforts. She told me she felt hopeful. But something was off. I could feel it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Dorothy never initiated. She responded. She adapted. She reflected Gary's energy back at him like a mirror. But she never brought anything of her own to the table. No complaints, no frustrations, no desires. I asked her once directly what she wanted from the marriage. She paused for a long time and then said, "I want stability. I want to know where I stand." I wrote that down. I underlined it. At the time, I thought she was expressing a need for emotional security. I was wrong. She was being completely literal. Around month 5, Gary cancelled 2 sessions in a row. Work trips, he said. Dorothy came alone both times. In individual sessions, spouses often open up differently. They relax. They say what they cannot say in front of the other person. I expected Dorothy to tell me she was lonely, frustrated, maybe suspicious of the cancellations. Instead, she talked about the house. She asked me if I had ever paid off a mortgage. She told me they had 7 years left on theirs. She talked about the interest rate, the equity, the fact that the house had nearly doubled in value since they bought it. She said it with a kind of quiet pride, like someone describing a garden they had been tending for decades. I tried to redirect her. I said, "Dorothy, I appreciate you sharing this, but let us talk about how you are feeling with Gary being away." She looked at me with genuine patience, the way a teacher looks at a student who has not yet grasped the lesson. And she said, "The house is the marriage, Dr. Whitfield. You cannot separate the two." I took that as a metaphor. I should have taken it as a thesis statement. In the second individual session, Dorothy was different. Not more open exactly, but more present. She asked me questions about my practice. She wanted to know how long I had been doing this work, how many couples I had treated, what percentage I thought stayed together. I answered honestly. I told her that roughly a third of the couples I treated made significant improvements. A third stayed together in a diminished way, and a third eventually separated. She nodded at that like she was confirming something she already knew. Then she asked me something I did not expect. She asked, "In your experience, Dr. Whitfield, do men who cheat ever truly stop?" I told her it depended on the man, on the circumstances, on whether the underlying issues were addressed. She said, "That is a very diplomatic answer." I said, "I am a therapist, Dorothy. Diplomacy is in the job description." She laughed at that. It was the first time I had heard her laugh. It was a short, dry laugh with no warmth in it at all. Gary came back. We resumed couple sessions. I noticed something new. Gary had started grooming differently. Better shirts, a new watch. He smelled like cologne in sessions, which he never had before. These are small things, but in my profession, small things are data. I noted them without comment. Dorothy noticed too. Of course she did. She complimented his shirt once. He said thank you, clearly uncomfortable. She smiled that same unreadable smile. One Thursday, about 8 months into treatment, Dorothy arrived 10 minutes early. Gary was not there yet. She sat down across from me and said very quietly, "I know about Linda." I asked who Linda was. She said, "Linda is the woman Gary has been sleeping with since 1991. I did the math in my head. 1991 was 12 years before they came to see me. 12 years. I asked her how she knew. She told me she had found a receipt in 1991 for a hotel in a town where Gary had no business being. She drove to the hotel. She sat in the parking lot. She saw Gary walk out with a woman she did not recognize. She did not confront him. She drove home. She made dinner. She never said a word. I asked her why. She said, because the house was not paid off. She explained it to me calmly, like she was explaining a business plan. In 1991, their mortgage had 19 years remaining. The children were small. She had no degree, no career, no savings of her own. If she confronted Gary and he left, or if she filed for divorce, she would lose the house or be forced to sell it and split whatever equity existed at the time, which was not much. She would be a single mother with 2 toddlers, no income, and half the value of a house in a depressed real estate market. So she made a decision. She would stay. She would be a good wife. She would raise the children, and she would wait until the house was paid off free and clear, until the children were grown and independent, until she had built enough of a case, financial and otherwise, to leave on her terms. For 12 years, she had been executing that plan. She tracked every expense. She opened a private savings account in small increments that Gary never noticed. She documented the affair without ever letting Gary know she was aware. She had dates, locations, credit card statements she had quietly photocopied. She had a folder, she told me, in a safety deposit box that Gary did not know existed. It was 3 inches thick. I asked her what that had been like, living with that knowledge every day for 12 years. Cooking dinner for a man she knew was lying to her, sharing a bed with him, celebrating holidays. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "The first year was the hardest. I cried every night after he fell asleep. I would go into the bathroom and turn on the faucet so he would not hear me. By the second year, the crying stopped. By the third year, I stopped feeling anything about it at all. It became a job. I had a job to do, and I did it well." There was no self-pity in her voice when she said that. There was something much worse. There was pride. The kind of pride that comes from surviving something that should have broken you by refusing to let it touch you anymore. I have seen that in trauma survivors. The numbness that looks like strength from the outside, but cost something enormous on the inside. Dorothy had paid a price for those 12 years that no house, no matter how much it appreciated in value, could ever repay. I sat there in my chair, and I felt the ground shift under my understanding of this case. Every session we had done, every exercise, every moment of apparent progress, it had all been performance. Not Gary's performance, Dorothy's. She'd been playing the role of the hopeful wife while quietly running out the clock on a 30-year mortgage. I asked her why she was telling me now. She said because the house would be paid off in 2010, 7 years from that conversation, and she wanted to know if I thought Gary would become violent when she finally told him the truth and filed for divorce. She was not asking me as a therapist. She was asking me as someone who had observed Gary up close for months. She wanted a risk assessment. I want to pause here because this is a moment that still troubles me. I was her couples therapist, not her individual therapist. My obligation was to the relationship, or at least to both parties equally. But Dorothy had just told me something that fundamentally altered the therapeutic dynamic. She was not in therapy to save the marriage. She had never been in therapy to save the marriage. She was there to study Gary, to watch how he behaved under observation, to gather one more layer of information for a plan she had been building for over a decade. I told her I could not continue couples therapy under these conditions without addressing the dishonesty in the room. She understood. She said she would think about it. Gary arrived. We had a session. It was, as always, pleasant and unproductive. Gary talked about wanting to take Dorothy to Italy. Dorothy said that sounded lovely. I watched her face, and for the first time I saw the mask for what it was. Perfect composure built on 12 years of discipline. Dorothy called me the following week and said they would not be returning to therapy. She thanked me for my time. I asked if she was all right. She said, "I am fine, Dr. Whitfield. I have always been fine. I just have a few more years to wait." I did not hear from either of them again for a long time, but I thought about Dorothy often. I thought about her sitting in that parking lot in 1991, watching her husband walk out of a hotel with another woman, and then driving home to make dinner without saying a word. I thought about the steel it takes to do that. Not for a day, not for a week, for 12 years and counting. I thought about whether that was strength or something else entirely, something colder, more calculating, something that psychology has words for, but that none of those words quite capture. In 2011, I received a letter. It was from Dorothy, handwritten on simple stationery. She told me the mortgage had been paid off in full in January 2010. She filed for divorce in March 2010. In the proceedings, she presented her documentation, the folder from the safety deposit box. 12 years of records. Hotels, gifts, phone logs, credit card charges. Gary's attorney tried to argue that Dorothy had condoned the affair by staying. Her attorney argued that she had stayed under duress, financial dependence, and had been systematically deceived. The judge sided with Dorothy. She received the house free and clear. She received a favorable alimony settlement. Gary was allowed to keep his retirement accounts, but Dorothy kept the home, which by 2010 was worth more than 3 times what they had paid for it. She wrote that Gary was devastated, not by the divorce, but by the realization that she had known the entire time. He kept asking her the same question over and over. How could you sit across from me for 12 years and say nothing? Dorothy told me she answered him once. She said, "You sat across from me for 12 years and lied every single day. I just did the same thing better than you did." According to Dorothy's letter, Gary tried to contact Linda after the divorce. Linda, the other woman. But Linda had ended things with Gary years earlier, sometime around 2006. He had not told Dorothy that, of course, because he did not know Dorothy knew. So for the last 4 years of the marriage, Gary had not even been having the affair anymore. He had simply been a man living with a wife who had already decided to leave him, carrying the guilt of an affair he thought was still secret, while the woman he had cheated with had moved on without him. There is something almost poetic about that. He ended up with nothing on all fronts. No wife, no mistress, no house. Just a retirement account and the knowledge that he had been outplayed by the woman he had underestimated for a quarter of a century. She ended the letter by telling me she was doing well. She had enrolled in community college. She was studying accounting. The children were supportive. She wished me well. I put the letter in a drawer. I've kept it there ever since. I think about Dorothy when people ask me what I have learned in 40 years of doing this work. They expect me to say something about love or forgiveness or the resilience of the human heart. And I do believe in those things. I have seen them. But I have also seen something else. I have seen what happens when a person decides that survival matters more than truth, and then builds an entire life around that decision, quietly, methodically, without ever asking for sympathy or permission. Dorothy was not a villain. I want to be clear about that. She was a woman with no resources and no options, who found herself trapped in a marriage with a man who had betrayed her, and rather than react in the moment, she chose to react on her own timeline. You can call that cold. You can call that strategic. You can call that deeply human. I have turned it over in my mind for years, and I still do not know which word fits best. What I do know is that Gary never saw it coming. And the reason he never saw it coming is that he never really looked at Dorothy, not once in 12 years. He saw what he expected to see, a quiet, compliant wife who needed him. He never considered the possibility that she was building a case against him every single day he walked through the door. That is what I have learned about people who cheat. Not all of them, but a lot of them. They stop seeing their spouse. They reduce them to a background character in their own story. And sometimes, very rarely, that background character turns out to be the most dangerous person in the room. If this story stayed with you the way it has stayed with me, I have others like it. 40 years is a long time to sit in a chair and listen to people tell you things they would never tell anyone else. I have heard things that still keep me up at night, and I have heard things that restored my faith in the strange, stubborn, complicated thing we call love. If you want to hear more, subscribe, and I will keep telling you what I know. I have nothing left to lose by being honest. That is one of the few advantages of getting old.